mother and father were Polish. People of Polish descent tended to be looked down on. As a kid, I wondered why. I decided to research Polish history. This is a current map of Poland. In the 14th century, Queen Jadwiga of Poland married Prince Jagiello of Lithuania. The combined countries were wealthy and strong. They controlled much of Central Europe. When the last Polish king died without any heirs, wealthy nobles controlled the country. They wrote a constitution in which the parliament could pass no legislation unless the voting was unanimous. This meant total control of the country. The country entered a period of serious decline. In 1791, a large group of concerned citizens wrote a new constitution, which was ratified on May 3, 1791. It permitted legislation to be passed by a simple majority and freed peasants from bondage to landowners. It was a combination similar to our Constitution and Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. Because of fear that this movement might spread to their countries, Poland was invaded by Austria, Prussia, and Russia and ceased to exist as a country in 1795. This is a map of the occupation after the invasions by these foreign countries. The Treaty of Versailles was ratified in 1918 following the defeat of Germany in World War I. Poland again became a sovereign country after 123 years of occupation. This is a map of Poland after the Treaty of Versailles. Poland was again invaded by German and Russian armies in 1939. Germany invaded Russia and was defeated. At the Yalta Conference, Roosevelt and Churchill were forced to agree with Stalin that the eastern part of Poland would become part of Russia, and the eastern part of Germany would become part of Poland. Stalin and his successors installed communism in Poland and all the areas that they controlled. And of course, this is a map of Poland after Yalta. Mikhail Gorbachev became premier of Russia in 1985. He released Poland and other countries from direct control of the Soviet hierarchy. This was the situation in Poland at the time of our trip. However, the residual of communism still existed in the country. Professor Mikosh, head of the Slavic department at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, was taking a group to his alma mater, the University of Lublin in Poland. Sue and I were eager to go, which was our first trip to Europe. We boarded a plane in Milwaukee and enjoyed the view of the Baltic countries as we approached Warsaw. We embarked and entered the terminal, which was painted in dismal colors. It still had a communist atmosphere. The immigration attendant was not very friendly. Military personnel were present in and out of the terminal. We boarded a bus and were taken to the school and our dorm in Lublin. The university was quickly formed before the Russian army entered Lublin to avoid the communist influence. The seal of the school. Lublin was a nice city. However, the economy was in shambles. Bread and a few staples were available, but the central control of merchandise was seriously flawed. A supermarket in Lublin. Note the empty shelves. When they would get a shipment of toilet paper, shoes, or any items of use, lines would form and they would be sold out in a short time. Bus fare was 2 cents American. There were stores where you could buy almost anything, but they would not accept Polish money. They would accept dollars, francs, or marks. A view of the university. The curriculum at the school was in English with Polish options. It included history, current events, culture, politics, art, music, dance, and movies. The students were from 16 countries. This is a dining hall, and in there were several Wisconsin students. In the basement of our dorm was a place they called a barrack. Students would drink beer and later sing and dance when they got to know each other. Our teachers, Elizabeth, Margaret, and Eva. On weekends, they would take us to various places in the country. And here we are in a bus heading toward a destination. Note there were priests and nuns as students. Our first trip was a place called Kazimierz, which was named after a Polish king. A view of the town square. Sue bought a painting by a Polish artist, which hangs in our living room, which we really enjoy. Overlooking the town and the Vistula River. Being a canoe enthusiast, I wish I were there for time to canoe the river. On another weekend, we were treated to another trip, and on our way, we saw this gentleman with his horse and wagon. We were on our way to a palace of Kozłówka, and this is a view of the gate and the palace. I suspect money to build a mansion was made by using the slave labor of peasants. On another weekend, we headed toward a city called Torun. Torun was a walled city, and as typical of larger cities, were built walls around them to protect them from invaders. Each had a watchtower and a sentry to warn if the invaders approached. A view from the watchtower. That's a church across the street. And the Vistula River off to the left. A view looking down from the tower, directly down. And down below is a statue of Copernicus. Copernicus was an astronomer that proved the Earth rotated about the sun rather than the sun rotating about the Earth, which was the prominent concept at the time. At the base of the tower is a statue of Copernicus. His home is across the street. After leaving Torun, we headed toward a place called Marburg. Marburg contained the view of a castle. And This is another view of the castle, a view of the drawbridge, and a view of the courtyard. It was originally called Marienburg for St. Mary and was built in 1406. It was built by the Teutonic Knights. They were originally part of the Crusades, who were organized to drive the Muslims out of Jerusalem. They slaughtered many Muslims with the sanction of the Pope. After the failure of the last crusade, the Knights returned and built the castle, which is reputed to be the largest castle built. They invaded areas around the Baltic and extracted tribute from them. They attempted to conquer Poland, but were defeated at the Battle of Grunwald by the Polish army. The order eventually declined. We were informed that we were leaving and unfortunately could not explore more of the castle. We are on our way to the Baltic coast at a place called Sopot. Of course, Sopot is in the area which is now part of Poland. A view of a few of our classmates relaxing. Many people enjoying the sun. After leaving Sopot, we headed toward a city called Danzig, but was now called Gdańsk in Poland. A gate to the city of Gdańsk. This is a view of the gateway, and Danzig was a walled city. The city was called an open city and was the only access to the Baltic Sea by Poland as part of the Versailles Treaty. It is now in an area awarded to Poland, of course, as part of the Yalta Agreement. The City Hall. Note the typical observation perch at the top. In the foreground is a statue of Neptune, a symbol of the city's relationship to the sea. An interesting art piece located at the post office at Gdańsk. It is reputed to be the start of hostilities of World War II. We now headed toward the Lenin shipyard at Gdańsk. This is the entrance to the shipyard. This shipyard was established to build ships for Russia. Note the sign Solidarność, meaning solidarity among workers. This is the location of the rebellion against the Communist Party led by Lech Walesa. An uprising of solidarity resulted in reprisals by the communists in which a number of workers were killed. This is a memorial to the massacre with a fellow student in the foreground. The boardroom of Solidarity Union. And guess who is sitting in Lech Walesa's seat, which of course is yours truly. We now headed back to Lublin. Following our excursion to the Baltic Sea, we returned to the campus. We learned about the Majdanek Nazi concentration camp on the outskirts of Lublin. On an off day, I decided to take a bus ride to Majdanek. The camp was an eye-opener. This is a view of the artwork at the entrance. The guides were East Germans and were very helpful. The camp was opened in October 1941 as a forced labor camp and converted to a concentration camp for Jews. It was then converted to a prisoner of war camp for captured Russian soldiers. The number of persons died in the camp was about 130,000, mostly from starvation or exposure. According to the information at the museum, Hitler was going to make Poland part of Germany and deport Poles to Siberia. A watchtower of the camp. The buildings were made of wood and hastily built. This is a view of an urn that contained the ashes of prisoners that had died in the ovens. The Poles added artwork to depict the horrors of the camp. This is a covered urn that held the ashes to the victims. Details on the urn cover. The inscription reads, "Be vigilant that this not happen again." A view of the cremation ovens. Lublin was a rabbinical center. This is a view of a Jewish cemetery. Note the shell hole through the headstone. In Lublin, they erected a memorial sculpture to the Jews killed at Majdanek. The remains of a synagogue. The plaque reads that it was bombed during a service. On Saturday afternoons in Lublin, there was an outdoor theater. This theater presented entertainment. It included musicians, choral groups, and skits. When a Russian group appeared, they were booed. Once each year, people make a pilgrimage to the monastery at Czestochowa to pay tribute to the icon of the Black Madonna. It is a combination of a religious and recreational outing. The pilgrims are welcomed by residents along the way. They sleep in barns or any accommodation offered. The trip takes about 10 days and is held in August. This is a view of some of our students and our teacher getting ready for the trip. These are people assembled in the town square and getting ready for the trip. As you can see, it involved a lot of people. This is a map to the monastery. Of course, we took the bus. A gate to the monastery. Note the replica of the icon at the top. Once inside the monastery, this is the ceiling of the church, which, as you can see, is quite elaborate. We entered the chapel with the icon, and this is a photo of the icon. The icon is darkened, presumably from a fire that had a sword slash. The icon is revered as a symbol of saving the monastery and Poland from an invasion by Sweden. The guide told us that a Westerner could not stay in that chapel for more than 15 minutes. I had to leave after 5. I suspect it must have been the ventilation system. This is a century perch, typical of walled cities. The young lady was from Moscow and gave me her address and phone number since she knew we were going to Moscow. Unfortunately, we did not have enough time to do so. We are looking down from the tower into the compound. Back to school in Lublin. When we arrived at the school, we were invited to a dinner by our teacher and her mother. It was a nice apartment. We had a good dinner and conversation. Her mother said that her husband was working. He was a physician and an engraving artist. She said he made more money as an artist. A view through the apartment window toward the town square. There was a formal graduation when the term was completed. This is a view of the graduates, most of which were from Wisconsin. The priest at the right is an attorney and the provost from the Archdiocese of Chicago. Another group of classmates. The person in the middle originally lived in the Sudetenland, a German enclave in Czechoslovakia. They opted to be part of Germany during the war. After the war, the Czechs made them go back to Germany. You will recall that the Sudetenland was awarded to Hitler by Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, declaring it was peace in our time. Professor Mikosh, his wife Sue, and the head of the school on graduation day. The head of the school later became vice consul for the Polish government in Chicago. One of our friends addressing the group on his experience as a student. In the background are replicas of 16 flags of the countries of the students. After graduation, we decided to visit my relatives in southern Poland in the city called Stara Żukowice. When we were there, we were met by my cousin and her family, and she took us to the grave of my grandmother. This is a photo of Genevieve and the grave of my grandmother. Her name was Annalise. She died in 1927, the year I was born. My grandfather, Adalbert Kocol, was killed in World War I in the battle between the Austrians and the Russians in 1915, which must have been near their farm. He was buried in a mass grave in a location that was unknown. My uncle Adam was conscripted into the Austrian army. He was wounded, but made it home and died in his own bed. This is one of the few locations where the Russians had any success, since the conscript tended to think of the Russians as potential liberators. Genevieve took us to the cemetery, and this is a vault, typical of that cemetery. The inscription reads, it was of the Kocol family. My cousin did not know them. She said older bodies were lowered and the newer bodies were placed on top. She then took us to the pastor of the local church. In that church were the records of births, baptisms, marriages, and deaths. The pastor is showing us the records. It is interesting that these records on microfilms were available at the Mormon Genealogy Library in Salt Lake City. This was the start of my pursuits in genealogy. I am currently writing the family history of each member of my mother's and father's siblings. One morning, I saw my cousin's daughter heating a pitchfork on a gas stove. We were later treated to a family outing in our honor. The pitchfork was used as a skewer for sausages. It was a very joyous occasion. Vodka mixed with fruit juice was shared by all adults. Potatoes were placed on the fire coals and later shared. These potatoes were the only baked potatoes we had in 3 months in Eastern Europe. We had all kinds of potatoes, but none with the skin. Another view of the family. We now left Stara Zhukovica and on our way to Krakow. This is the photograph of Wawel Castle. Krakow is the second largest city in Poland. It was spared in World War II because it was a Nazi control center. Pope John Paul II was Archbishop of Krakow and the first non-Italian pope in 455 years. This is a view of the castle. The crypt of a Polish king, and it is similar to the crypt of British kings in Westminster Abbey in London. The town square of Krakow and a view of the city hall. The city hall, of course, had an observation post at the top. Every noon in the square and on the radio, a bugler sounds a warning and suddenly stops. The legend is that the bugler was warning that the Mongols were approaching and was shot with an arrow before he finished. Outside of the castle, we saw this cute view of teachers devising a way to keep the children together. I thought it was very cute. Jagiellonian University is the third oldest university in Europe. My cousin's grandson received a PhD from the school and received an offer from Ohio State in the U.S. Krakow has become a computer technology center and is tied to several firms, U.S. firms. It is aiming to become the Silicon Valley of Europe. We now decided to visit Auschwitz. And this is the gate to Auschwitz. Auschwitz is in a Polish city of Oświęcim. And the gate reads, "Work will make you free." Note that the buildings are made of masonry and meant to be permanent. We will skip the horrible details. We decided to go from Auschwitz to a place called Zielona Góra, which is the birthplace of Frédéric Chopin, a view of Chopin's home. You'll notice the windows open and it has curtains in front of it. View of a concert audience waiting for the concert. The concert was enjoyed by all of the audience, and they wanted more. We now are on our way to Warsaw. Sue is on a balcony in Warsaw. We had the use of an apartment in Warsaw. The apartment was owned by a professor of Warsaw Polytechnical Institute who was currently a visiting professor at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. He and his family stayed in our house at the east end of Milwaukee, and they permitted us to stay in their apartment in Warsaw. A view of the town square in Warsaw. We had lunch at a restaurant called Belizicek. I asked the waiter the significance of the name. He said it was named after a legendary animal. I asked, what happened to the animal? He said the animal died when he saw the bill. A view of the statue of Chopin with several of our classmates in the Chopin Park in Warsaw. A view of the park with an audience waiting for the concert. Japanese students in the audience. The concert was very good and everyone enjoyed it. And this is a view of the artist receiving flowers after the concert. The tomb of the unknown soldier with the eternal flame, which is similar to many countries, including the U.S. A view of Warsaw from the Palace of Culture, which was built by the communists. Residents say this is the best view of Warsaw since you can see the Palace of Culture from here. There was a subway under construction in Warsaw, and this is the view of the construction site. A monument to the Jews deported from Warsaw. A monument to the uprising in Warsaw. As the Russians reached the Vistula River, the Poles decided to liberate Warsaw. With very limited resources, they staged an uprising, expecting help from the Russians. Stalin forbid the Russian army from helping. As a result, the Poles were slaughtered. Apparently, this is what Stalin had in mind. The retreating German army destroyed Warsaw block by block. A friend of ours was a host to two female cousins. Several years later, one of the cousins decided to come to the U.S. with her son. Her husband, Zygmunt Zare, an engineer, attempted to join her. His attempt was rejected. They asked us if we would intercede for him. We went to the American Embassy in Warsaw with Zygmunt and his mother. Our pleading was to no avail. They said if a family member came to the U.S. on a visa, the spouse could not get a visa because of fear they would stay in the U.S. We offered our condolences and left. We then boarded a train and headed to Minsk, Belarus, and the second part of our Eastern European trip. Thank you.